Kathy, whenever you're ready, you let me know. Oh, we should get you a remote control. Careful. Of course, if we got you a remote control, it'd probably make the garage and the police station, so. There would be. Kathy, you ready? Okay, I'm going to call this meeting of the Finance Committee of the City of Pataskala City Council to order. Kathy, if you call the roll, please.
Barstow.
Here.
Hampshire.
Here.
Epperson.
Here.
Also present is the mayor and Mr. Nicholson, Finance Director. So, Mr. Nicholson, looks like you have an agenda for us this evening, so get us started, please.
Okay, first item on the agenda is the 2021 budget schedule. This document mirrors what we've done for the last 4 or 5 years, and for Jude and Dustin, the goal, basically, we work backwards from when the budget needs to be delivered to Licking County. The goal is to have council adopt the budget at the mid-November meeting. The reason we do that is in the unfortunate event, we've been really fortunate that if something happens at the last minute or a change wants to be made, we have either the first December meeting or even the mid-December meeting if need be. Anytime a supplemental appropriation or an appropriation ordinance is amended at the third reading, you need to have the fourth reading. So that buys us a little bit of a window on the back end. We work backwards from that. So at the very beginning, just to kind of walk you through it, the first part of the budget process is the capital planning process. That you'll hear the phrase CIP, Capital Improvement Program. Those generally are capital equipment, infrastructure projects, although large dollar initiatives that they want, the directors want you to know what they're about and why they're requesting them. We include those as well. Things like GIS, those types of programs. They're not necessarily capital assets in the sense that, it's a dump truck, it's a sewer line or a water line, but it's important because it's a lot of money and we want you guys to understand everything that's in the budget. So we start off with them working on that, and on a parallel track, I work on the revenue. While they're doing that, and I'm working on the revenue projections to kind of see where things are going to look like as far as the resources that they have to work with. The next step is we give them each individual, I'll call them cost centers, but departmental budget models, where they budget wages, supplies, materials, contractual services, just the usual budget stuff, the non-capital stuff. Once the capital stuff comes back to me, and the city administrator and I have had a chance to review it and sit down with the departments and maybe ask some questions, we convert that into budget numbers for them that they also load into their budget model. So when they turn back their budget model to us, it's their operating budget plus the capital impacts. Okay, so those all go in, and then I lovingly call it, we play Tetris, because we're literally picking things up and moving them around, saying, well, we can't do this in 2021. Let's move that up to 2022, because we look at fund balance throughout the whole 5-year. We plan for a 5-year cycle every year. So it's the current year plus 4 years out. And so we want to make sure that the fund balance is either, in a perfect world, growing, which indicates that we are stable, we are strong financially. Worst case, maybe you go down for a little while, but then if you've got some major projects you need to do, you go down for a little ways and then you bounce back up. So we do that. We move things around, maybe come back to them and say, okay, we can't afford 3 cruisers a year. Okay, maybe we ask the chief maybe it's 2 cruisers, or maybe it's 2 this year, 3 next year, and we do some of that, I'll call it horse trading, to try to get everybody on board. I will say this year is definitely going to be a different one, going into it, knowing where we are with revenues being stressed. So, and we'll talk more about that in a little bit, but that's definitely going to be a different process. So at the end of the day, this is the process that we go through. It allows the administration, Tim and myself, to sit down with the department heads talk to them about their needs, their issues, make sure that they have the resources that they feel they need. We then pull it all together to see what it looks like. Our department heads have been really good in the past. We don't have let's throw everything on the wall and see what sticks. We've also told our departments this isn't the kind of operation, unlike probably what you guys have experienced at state and federal, like if you don't spend it, you won't get it next year. That's not the approach we take. We want people to budget conservatively, but give themselves enough room to maneuver in the event, unanticipated things happen. Understanding that if something big happens, we get a grant, there's a big project that we need to do, we come back to council and say, okay, we didn't plan for this, so this is some additional funding we might need. But this process gets us through that, and then there are some hearings with council where you guys get to ask questions of Alan, of myself, of Scott, or Chris, for example, just to talk about, I see in your budget these things, tell me about them. So that's the schedule. And again, it gets us to the end of the year, and as long as we hit the milestones, and we've done really well. We've gotten it done in time for like the last 4 or 5 years to have it done by the mid-November meeting, which I know from my own perspective, but I know from council's perspective, it takes a lot of work off the table at a good time. So that's was the first item. If you guys have any questions, it's pretty straightforward.
Jamie, I got a couple questions. And obviously, individual council members can go and approach Jamie or Tim or an individual director about an issue with the budget or something like that. So we try to make this as inclusive and get as many questions asked as we do. And then the budget workshop, we don't vote on anything, but I think the directors get a pretty clear idea of what council's thinking in terms of some of the projects that are not going to make it.
Yeah, there's definitely a sense when you come into a council hearing and you hear from a number of council members that there's not support for an initiative, then we go back and
do something else.
Tweak it.
Right,
So-
tweak it or whatever, so those are really helpful. Jamie, I noticed that you put it on September 30th. That's a Wednesday. Or is this is,
Oh, that was supposed to be 20 there, too.
yeah,
I missed that one.
That's okay. I just thought maybe you and Tim had talked and maybe wanted to put it on an off week. We'll talk about it when we get to the meeting, but
Yeah.
it would be September 27th
Yep.
would be the Monday. We'll
Yep.
talk.
Thank you.
We might be able to do it, so we'll try to set that as a council meeting. Okay. Hey, guys, any questions about this process? Okay.
And when we do go through the budget process, I provide you with 2 documents. One is more of I call it a budget briefing book. It's maybe 60 pages with couple pages per each fund to give you sort of the high level. These are the major projects. This is what staffing looks like. Fund balance. It's just sort of the bullet points. I also give you then a comprehensive budget book, which is fairly significant with a lot of information, which you can read all or any, to your heart's content. One of the things a number of council members have availed themselves, and the door is always open. I'm sure Tim will be in the same. BJ and I always had a policy of anyone who wants to come in and go over the budget book, or if you have some questions. When Tim was a council member, he came in with I think 100 Post-it notes on the side of his budget book.
Good heavens.
But go over them, and so we can help you understand, so that you're better informed when you approve the budget.
Just real quick, just for my understanding of things. So with the CIPs, that's just kind of the directors for their departments.
We will bring the CIP back to you. We don't approve it as a formal document.
Right.
We bring it back to you guys to say, this is what we're putting forward as the CIP.
It's like the request. It's like
Yeah,
what they would, in a perfect world, what they'd like to have.
Yes.
Okay.
And then we hear from council, like if Alan has said, I want to do these 6 streets, and you guys say, 5 of them are okay, but I really want to do this road instead of that road, and you guys figure that out, type of thing.
Gotcha.
It gives you guys the opportunity to weigh in, because what we don't want to do is present everything at one time, and then it's a lot of moving parts.
And it's also my understanding that all the department heads have an understanding of the overall budget based on previous years to try to get a target in.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. I try to give them as much information, because their resources basically is the carryover balance plus the revenues that they have coming in. That's what they have to work with. But at the end of the day, we want to keep a fund balance that stays within 25 to 35% of their annual expenditures. That's the target range we shoot to maintain.
And that carryover balance is that generally, on average, a certain percentage in each department, or is each
Be
department
25
different?
to 35 in the street fund, the police fund. We try in the general fund. Capital's different because capital goes up and down and up and down. You know, if you don't have any money, you don't spend anything out of the capital fund. But 25 to 35, which is exactly why we're stable right now, is we have that backstopping us if our revenues really continue to go down.
Okay, thank you, Jim.
Yep.
So just for record, Mr. Hicken has rejoined us. Tim, have you had a chance to review the proposed budget schedule?
I have.
Okay. Do you think that the administration can follow this? I mean, is that going to be,
Nope.
do it? Okay,
Nope,
thanks.
I think this
We-
is very much what has become the preferred method, for lack of a better term. And I think it fits pretty much with all of my years looking
Okay,
at it. So.
good.
And as the administration, I would think Jamie and I could make this work.
Okay, very good. I always ask that. Okay. We won't formally adopt it, but we'll just, again, that's our guidance. Okay, thanks, Jamie. Anything else on budget schedule? No? Good. Okay, what's up next?
The
Looks like-
next item deals with our city's income tax code. We have had a number of taxpayers who do not live in the city of Pataskala, who do not work in the city of Pataskala, but whether through not knowing where they live, or their tax preparer or their employer have had city of Pataskala taxes withheld. And when they find out that, hey, I don't live there, I want my money back. The issue we run into is the code only allows me to go back 3 returns. That's all the farther I can go back legally according to our code. Brian and I had some email exchanges with Rita, and I was not terribly comfortable with their advice, which is just to tell them to go ahead and refund it. I'm a firm believer in, staying within the limits of what I'm allowed to do. One of the things we have considered, and I'd like for this group to consider, is instead of 3 returns, and this is purely for errant, not like, hey, your tax position changed, you amended your return, you literally don't live in or work, you're not subject to the tax in any way, shape, or
Yeah, these are folks who had no income tax obligation to the city
Correct.
whatsoever. Now, would that be that's just for people, okay, is that for people who live here and then find out that for example, I had some folks at church say, well, we're not voting for the police income tax because our income taxes are going up. And I said, you guys are both retired. You're not paying any income. Oh, we pay every quarter. I said, call Jan. And they got refunds. So there might be sometimes people who live here in the city who are mistakenly paying tax. These are people who are who never had an obligation to begin with.
So they live in, let's say, Harrison Township or one of the other ones, and have a Pataskala mailing address. So they say, oh, I live in Pataskala, but they don't, so they're not subject to the return. The language would have to be crafted very clearly with the law director to make sure that we don't have unintended consequences. Rita does, I hate to say this in a public meeting, but Rita does 5 years is as far back as they go.
I think.
So if they find out that you haven't filed, they go back 5 returns. Okay, so if I can claim money from you 5 years back, I feel it's appropriate to match that if you've given it to me 5 years. Much beyond that, at some point, everyone has a responsibility to know where they live.
Right.
So I guess I would like to get some direction. If this is something that you guys would consider, I can work with the law director, and then we can
Okay.
bring something back to you to consider.
Okay, 5 years, is that the same, any questions about this issue? And this, yeah, this is a much more common issue than you would think. Folks who, because of the zip code
Right.
confusion, it's much more common than one would think, but
Okay.
we do see it, yeah. Okay. Why don't you work with
I'll work with Brian,
Brian,
and
we'll
bring something back.
bring an ordinance back so you
Yep.
can amend it. Okay, thanks.
Super.
Awesome. Very good.
Next item, I have not drafted the supplemental appropriation yet. I provided a kind of a list of all the items that I think are going to need to be included in the supplemental. The first is 2020 is a 27 pay year. For salaried employees, that does not affect us. We take our salary and divide it by 27 or by 26 and don't take a 27th pay. We have two options. The hourly employees, however, they have hours, they get paid. So there's in essence a 27th pay this year, which we didn't catch when we budgeted. So that's, we're going to have to factor that into the calculations. It's one of those things. I think it's about 3.25% is what that kind of equates to for the salaried employees. So that would be one of the items on the supplemental. The wage scale increases for 2020. The budget models had a 3% kind of a placeholder. We were still in negotiations with the steelworkers, the FOP, and the OPBA. The police, the FOP, and the OPBA received 6%, and the steelworkers got 4%. The non-union as well got 4%. So I need to reflect that into the wage budgets as well. One of the items that came as part of the contract agreement was longevity pay. It's not a tremendously huge item, but I want to make sure that we've got the funds in there to cover those payments. As you're aware, Fana and Deagle, that we'll probably need to put some money aside for that settlement, so that'd be another item that would be in there. We have one employee, Geiger, who a lot of years, a lot of vacation time and comp time banked. So when he leaves, there's going to be a pretty substantial cash out. Alan thinks he may be able to cover that with the open crew leader position that hasn't been filled. So we'll look at that as part of it, but we'll see where we end up. And again, the other item was the Minks Street Improvements Project. When the state comes back and says, "Oh, by the way, 5 years later, here's another bill for you." Alan thinks he can cover it, and I think we probably are going to be able to, but I just want to give you the heads up that could be another item that might be on the supplemental. So we'll work on that between now and the next council meeting, and hope to have that for first reading at the mid-June council meeting would be the goal.
Mr. Nicholson?
Yeah.
Very quickly, can you touch on why supplemental appropriations have to happen?
Okay, so council, the budget is a couple different things. There's the permanent appropriations. That's the budget book. That's the document you guys will approve in November. That's called the permanent budget. Generally speaking, if you've budgeted well, and nothing changes, nothing unique happens, that works. But as you can imagine, every plan works until it meets the enemy, and then it falls apart. We're generally pretty close, but some things happen. We may end up getting a grant, for example. Or for a project where we have a local match. We hadn't budgeted for that, but I have to book the revenue and then that expenses as well for the grant project. So there are a number of things. Council can choose, hey, we want to, as long as we're doing the road project, we budgeted $600,000, and they said for another 100 they can do this project, we would like to do that, and then I do the supplemental to cover that. I'm not able to issue a purchase order or encumber the funds unless there's appropriation from council. So that's your mechanism. That's the power of the purse that you guys do. I'm your guy to make sure that all that information is in front of you, and making sure that if we increase the appropriations, that the fund balance, again, it's sort of a balancing act, right? So if I increase appropriations, my fund balance is going to fall off a bit. Well, what does that do for the end of the year numbers, and what does that look like? So that's part of that whole process. I will tell you, especially for Jude and Dustin, we are very cognizant of council's wishes. BJ and I always were, and Tim and I are in the same boat. We present a budget with planned projects, planned initiatives. Alan's is a great example. A lot of times, he thinks by the engineer it's going to cost X. Well, it comes in at 75% of X, so there's some savings. We do not allow them to spend those monies unless they come back to you and say, hey, I had $50,000 in savings. I'd like to use that savings on this project. And if council says, yeah, that's great, go ahead and do it, then we allow them to do that. We take that budget document very seriously. That's the tool. We know what your wishes are, and so we want to make sure that, money doesn't get spent that isn't supposed to be spent.
Thank you. That's perfect. That's
Thanks.
exactly what I wanted to
Thank you,
say.
Mr. Hicken.
Okay, after the supplemental, the internal control audit, at the last charter review, they added language into the charter. I guess it's charter, right? It was charter review, so.
Yeah, I believe so. I believe they put it into the charter.
And it requires council to perform an internal control audit. This concept has been kind of difficult to put our hands around. We go through an annual financial audit every year. And it's from soup to nuts. It's from payroll to cash receipts to capital assets to time and attendance. They check everything. And they also do internal control testing. So they will sample whatever their program tells them to sample, 50 transactions, 50 receipt transactions. And they will walk them through from the initial receipt up to where it posts to the ledger and gets in the bank to make sure that it's the same every time. And, every now and again, there'll be a little hiccup. Maybe it didn't get in that day. Maybe it got, because of some reason the bank deposit didn't get taken for a day. But generally, they want to make sure that the internal controls that we have in place are being used and are effective. They don't test every transaction. No audit ever will, because the audit costs would probably quintuple if you tested every single transaction. They do random sampling. They also test a higher percentage of the large dollar items, so maybe they test every transaction over $50,000. But then they do some sampling below that. And so it depends on their comfort level. If they sample and they find more anomalies than they would like, then they increase the sample size to make sure that they just didn't have adverse selection and somehow managed to pick the 3 or 4, not the best transactions to look at, but we generally have had no issues at all. So, little unclear exactly what we're trying, what the goal was, and so this is really a council thing.
Well, yeah, I sent out the, what you had provided last year.
Right, from our
internal
auditors.
control and from our auditors. Is this, and I sent it out, I think I sent it to Mr. Hicken, and I think I sent it to members, right? Okay, so, Jamie and Tim, is this something that, is this a starting point, or is this something that we can implement? Is there somebody that can come out and do this, or?
Like
Or what?
this, the internal control, they do these kinds of tests as part of the audit.
Okay.
So that's where the I guess
Confusion.
where the confusion is. If you're wanting, what auditors typically do outside of an audit is what are called agreed upon procedures. And that basically you contract with the audit firm to do certain things. So schools do it all the time with their athletic boosters, their music boosters, because there's a lot of cash. Just it's kind of out. It's off to the side of the school's books, but they're responsible for them. So they will hire the auditors to basically do agreed upon procedures. I want you to test this and this and this for this booster club, and so that's one approach, would be to do an agreed upon procedures with auditors to say, we'd like you to come in and test internal controls. We'd have to figure out what that means. The more things they test, obviously, the higher the cost, is what you're going to get. The one thing about internal controls, any internal control, is that the cost of the internal control shouldn't outweigh the benefit. You could put in internal controls that would guarantee every penny is spent and accounted for, but nobody could get any work done, right? Because they'd all have to come to me, and then I'd have to go to the company. And I mean, at its most ridiculous extreme, you could put in such tight internal controls that you would never have any kind of an error or a loss, but the problem would be you couldn't get anything accomplished. So the goal under the AICPA is that basically that the cost of the control shouldn't outweigh the benefit. And we have internal controls, for example, on expenditures. So we get an invoice, we match it up to a purchase order. We ship it out to the department heads. Every director reviews the invoices to say, yep, I got it, that's appropriate, and then it comes through to me, and then I review it, make sure that it it's an appropriate expenditure, it's for a proper public purpose, and there's no other things that are going to go sideways. So, those are the type of internal controls we have. Obviously, we can contract with a firm to do independent testing. You're almost going to have to do somebody outside our current auditors because, obviously they've already audited. So if you're wanting a true independent look at it, you probably need to go outside.
Could the administration, show these things that Jamie has provided to us and try to find a firm that could do some sort of internal control audit so we are complying with the charter?
I think that we can look. If you remember, Mr. Barstow may remember, one of the issues is when the Charter Review Commission put the item on, several of us, as we came around the corner and said, "Oh, we have to do this," could find no auditing firms that had ever heard of it. And so it's in one way, it's kind of like the double secret probation audit or something. I don't mean to make light of it as much as what I mean to say is the Charter Review Commission seemed to believe that it was incredibly common. And as we went looking for it when I was on council, we found that it was not.
Okay.
So but I would say I have no problem at least investigating whether or not we might find a separate accounting
Okay.
firm. My recommendation would be that we bring it back to this group and we tell you what the anticipated price tag
Right,
is.
exactly, yeah. This is something, I just want to try to put this to bed. We kind of left it dangling from last year and never got it tied off, so.
I think it is also, although it's not common even there, in the public sector, in the private sector, corporate this may be a more common practice. It is not in the public governmental nonprofit type in our
Right.
world.
No, it is I can tell you, it is very common in the private sector.
Yeah.
A lot of folks are really, because there's less regulation, we're heavily regulated, but
Right.
there's less regulation in that area. So, any questions from?
Actually, yes. Is this an annual requirement?
Every 5 years, if I recall.
I think
Once a five, okay.
I'd have to look at the charter, I think it's 5.
And you said we already have a company that's auditing us separately?
We are, all public entities are audited under the auspices of the Auditor State's Office. Now, that can either be done with AOS auditors on site, or it can be done with third-party, what are called IPAs, independent public auditors. Those are firms that have been pre-approved by the Auditor State as being qualified, have the necessary expertise, staff, what have you. They do the bid process. And so, I think I get 5 points to move. If I like one audit firm over another, I get like 5 points out of 100 to move the needle, which really isn't much. But generally, if you use an IPA, they're appointed, and they're generally 3-year contracts with a 3-year extension. We are wrapping up our second 3 years. There's a strong probability the AOS may want to take us in-house, which it's a lot more work with the Auditor State. They like to spend time in your shop.
Is this something we pay for?
Yeah, our audit fees run just under $16,000 a year for an annual financial audit.
I guess my opinion on the matter is, why are we paying for something twice? If it's already being done by an independent company, how come that will not suffice? Why do we got to find another company and pay them as well? It just doesn't seem like a prudent use of funds if it's already being audited.
Right, well, you have to talk to the previous Charter Commission folks about that. They see.
I understand, but
They put it in the charter, so we have to be
How
careful.
come their audit can't suffice for that? No, why
Well-
has it got to be from a special company? Is that might be a Brian question, I don't know, but
It is. I think, I'm just trying to, this is an issue from last year that I want to put to rest. Maybe this is something that we can work with the law director on to make sure that we are complying with this. I'm not saying, oh, we have to go out and hire, some guy with a green eye shade
Right.
to redo everything. It's just that this is in the charter.
Right, I
And the Charter
understand.
Commission was hot to trot about this. So I want to just tie this off and then either decide we're going to do one or the other, so.
no, I completely understand.
yeah.
I know it's in the charter, and if it's in the charter, it's what needs to be done. I just don't know if there's any interpretation or if there's any legal explanation as to why what we currently have will not suffice that and why we have to pull more funds out to do something twice. Just doesn't make sense.
That would have been my direct question. Do you-
I would defer to the law director.
Is it redundant to you, though?
I believe it to be redundant.
Okay.
The auditor of state reviews, so even when our audit is done, it gets submitted to the auditor of state's office. They do a desk review. So even there, they review all the work papers, all the testing, the internal control testing, cash testing. They look at everything. So I have two sets of auditors, basically, looking at our books. So yeah, I could understand some concern if there are issues, if there have been weaknesses, material weaknesses pointed out. Our books have always been clean, and we've never had any concern for internal control process.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, no, thanks, Mr. Mayor. No, we win, we get high praise. We won the,
Mr. Yost came out here and everything.
we had, we get the high praise every year because the finance department keeps an eye on things. Maybe this is more of a situation where we work with the law director to have him look at this and make sure that we are complying. If we're complying, he can issue an opinion to say, hey, you're complying and we're compliant with the charter. Okay.
And being unfamiliar with kind of how the charter reviews go, I know we have a new committee that's going to be looking at this shortly.
Budget tonight.
Maybe that's something that can be discussed.
They can always take it out of the
Maybe
charter.
review that,
if that's their
and see if it
pleasure.
makes sense to them. That way, we're not looking at this further down the road.
Right. Yeah, it's just something I just want to get behind us. Okay. Anything else on internal controls? Okay. All right, Jamie.
Okay,
Handbook, employee handbook.
Employee handbook. We have an employee handbook that provides direction on all non-union employment behavior, let's put it that way. Dealing with all methods and manners for employees. Any employee who's subject to a collective bargaining agreement, so the police officers, the sergeants, the street department guys, utility guys, and some of the clerks, the contract is always supreme, right? So we look to the contract. What does the contract say? If the contract is silent, in other words, it doesn't address an issue, then it falls to the handbook and the charter and the codified ordinances. So the handbook is given to every employee. It talks about appropriate and inappropriate behavior in the workplace. It talks about data security. It talks about leave requests, all manners of things. We try to keep it updated reasonably periodically, every couple of years probably, or more frequently if there's material changes. We also then bring it to council for adoption. The concept with that is it's a best practice with the GFOA that if your governing body adopts it, then in essence it has the force of law as far as we're concerned. It's, council has approved it. It's the law of the land that we operate under. We've had a few changes with the contract. When we concluded negotiations with the 3 bargaining units, there were a number of items that changed in the contract. And when those are done, they're taken care of. We don't need to change the handbook for them. But for the non-union employees, there's a number of things. For example, Christmas Eve in the collective bargaining agreements is considered a holiday. It was not in the past. Columbus Day, this was a royal pain. Police used to get Columbus Day off, and it was the only day they didn't get the Friday after Thanksgiving. So we had 2 different holiday schedules, which made timekeeping and payroll a little complicated because our system can only accommodate one master holiday schedule. So you always had to go in and manually intervene, take things out, put things in. So we finally got the police officers to agree to give up Columbus Day and instead go to the Friday after Thanksgiving. So we just want to make sure that all the documents are consistent. So however we're treating the FOP individuals, OPBA, steelworkers, we want to treat the non-union employees the same way with the same type of benefits and requirements. Longevity pay is not in the handbook. It is now in the contracts. Tuition assistance, we've modified that a bit. We don't have many individuals who take advantage of it, just usually a couple. They tend to be the police officers. But we've made it a little more, I'll say, competitive with other communities. We used to pay 50% with a limit. We bumped that up to 100%, up to the same limit. So just to kind of make it work a little better for the individuals. And just some other changes to the overtime policy, for example. If you're called in after midnight, it's a different. If you're called in at 10 p.m., it's one kind of approach. If you're called in after midnight, it's a different approach. Because a lot of times when the guys get called in at 2 a.m., if they have to come in, by the time they're here, they're not going to go back home for an hour or two of sleep. So it's just some recognition of that. And then what we're also going to do is go through a comprehensive scrub of the document. I've given it to Jeff Stankunas, who is our labor counsel, to say, okay, federal law has changed dramatically in various places. Go through it with a fine-tooth comb if you see anything that's in conflict. And they looked at the 2016, the 2018 edition of it. And so he added some stuff. And so it was in really good shape in 18, but again, federal law changes, FLSA regulations change, so we just want to make sure that everything that we have in there, somebody doesn't say, oh, wait a minute, well, you said this, that's no longer legal. Okay, well, let's make sure we have everything, I's dotted, T's crossed. So we're going to go through it, kind of a comprehensive scrub, just to make sure that there's no conflicting language. Over here it says one thing, and over here it says something else, and they're in conflict. So working with the city administrator, my finance manager, Janice, who, if anybody's going to find the issue in a conflict, Janice is going to find it. She's good at that. And then Jeff as well. And then what we would plan to do is highlight all the changes in the document and then give you guys a copy of the document for your review. And then have council approve it and then we'll roll it out to the department heads. So that's what's going on with the employee handbook. And I think that's it as far as the specified items. I did want to give you guys a quick update on income tax collections. We have some time. I received the June 1st settlement information. We receive settlements from RETA the 1st of the month and right around the 15th of the month. So the two in May were definitely down. That was our first collection periods where we saw reduced revenues. The one from today was down about 33% from a year ago. And I put on each of your, are they daises? What's the plural of that? I don't know.
Deus.
Deus? Okay. A quick analysis, and I basically broke it down. I went back from 2015. I thought I did 14, so I guess I only did 15 through 19, and I looked at how much. So column A is January through April actual collections. So that's how much we collected over that time period. Column B is how much did we collect during the month of May. Column C is the first half settlement for June, so it's the June 1st settlement. And then column D is really B and C added together. Okay, so it's like 3 settlements from RETA. So what I wanted to look at is, since that was unique, since it's down in these 3 settlements, what did that look like? What kind of percentage? What was the relationship between that amount and the rest of the year? Okay, and it's about, on average, it's been about 47% of the remaining year collections. So for 2020, I looked at column D, and if I factored that 47%, I came up with column E, that 1.919 million, so 1.92 million. That's what I would project to receive if that relationship is accurate over the next 6.5 months. So if I add all of it across, my current projection would have us end the year at about 4.68 million. The budget is 6.07 million, so that's would be a hit of about $1.4 million or 23%. And again, this is 3 data points, so the caveat is it's a best guess given 3 data points. I'm going to continue to keep this updated, looking to see, okay, what happens when I get the second half of June? What happens when I get the first half of July? To just see if this is tracking that way or if it's getting worse or it's getting better. there's about a 2-month lag from when when employees work to when we actually see the settlement money. It can be about 2 months. That's why we didn't start seeing the drop off until May. So as the economy, wood to knock, as the economy, may turn around, there's going to be a lag there as well. Even if employment were full employment today, we're probably talking about, what was that, July, August. So maybe August or 1st of September settlement. So we're going to keep an eye on it, and we continue to do that. But I just wanted to put some scope to it, I guess. You guys don't see the numbers on a daily basis. I do. So I want to make sure that you guys are aware that, this shouldn't be any surprise for anybody. The question is, the materiality of it is probably a little more significant than I would have liked early on. But being a veteran community, it's hard to know. We don't have like a dozen large employers I can call and say, what's your payroll going to look like for the next 6 months? When I worked in another community, I could reach out to the CFOs and say, okay, ballpark, are you up? Are you down? Are you flat? I don't need, insider trader information. I just need to know generally, what am I looking at? Being a veteran community, most people work outside, outside the community. And so I have no way of knowing if they're working and getting paid or if they're not. And so obviously we're seeing that hit here. What's important to note, too, is the impact to the funds. So if you look at the second half of that document, I've broken it down in the percentages initially that they are receiving the revenue. So the police department receives 55% of the revenue. So I assumed, okay, that $1.4 million, they'll get 55% of that reduction, and so on down the line. The only problem with that was when I did that, the debt service fund ended up being negative. And debt service is the one thing, even if I can't pay salaries, I must pay debt service. That is, that gets paid either, regardless. So what I had to figure out is how do I cover about that additional $140,000? And so proportionally in the collection amounts, the police and street would take that $140,000 extra kicker. So at the end of the day, we're looking, given the $1.4 million hit, if that ends up being the bogey, it's about just a little under $500,000 to the street fund and about $860,000 to the police fund. You'll notice, so that you end up with that adjusted carryover balance. That would be the balance at the end of the year we talked about earlier. You'll notice that the street fund is at 18%. That is below our target of 25 to 35. That's the number that we try to maintain. That would indicate we're burning through some of the reserves to maintain operations. And again, this assumes no adjustments to spending. Okay, this is purely just the revenue side of things. Police are still within the band at 31%. Capital, again, is a weird. It really isn't a 25 to 35 because you bank money in the capital improvements fund until you have a project and then you use it, so your balance falls off very quickly.
Or you get something from OPWC or...
Yeah, and you got to drop $100,000 on local match and it's just gone.
Right.
And then the debt service ends up being about $35,000 to the plus. I try to always make sure there's just a little bit of a cushion in there in case collections fall off at the end of the year, that I've got enough cash to pay for that. So obviously, and I guess the purpose of this was just to kind of give you guys sort of an insight into what I'm seeing. It's not the end of the world. We are positioned well to weather this. Our department heads have done a good job of being cautious in spending. I will say I've not seen anything that I thought was inappropriate. There were a couple requisitions that came through that Tim and I asked questions, probably a little more questioning than we would have in the past.
One or two we sent back.
One or two we sent back going, no. And I guess, that's the message that I think everyone's received it. And that's also why, for example, with the loss of my accounting clerk, I can't in good conscience, replace her when I'm asking all the department heads to either cut spending or reduce spending or what have you. So, lead by example. So we'll make it work. But I think those are the types of things that we're going to have to look at. Definitely when we hit the summer and we go into the CIP, there's definitely going to be a much different looking probably CIP this year. We'll have probably most of the stuff backloaded, meaning it'll be out in 23, 24, 25 instead of 21 and 22, 23, just because, we don't know how long the recovery is going to take. I don't know if the right phrase is attended, but I was on a webinar from the GFOA talking about the various kinds of recoveries, and I can give you guys, I can share that with you, but it's how they look structurally. Is it basically a decline then suddenly bounces back? Does it bounce back but then fall back off and it's like a W? There's different thoughts in terms of how that's going to work, and nobody knows right now what this is going to look like. And if we get another COVID slam where they shut us back down, we're more likely to have that W look where people are starting to get out and move around, spend money, and nope, falls off again. So just to let you guys know, we are watching that very, very closely. And I think we have not had any issues with any department. People grumble, obviously, and that's fair. It's fair to grumble, but nobody really squawks too much about, they all get it. The goal is to not have to do anything that would materially impact operations for city. So that as far as the citizens see, police are still out on the street patrolling, street guys are out mowing and patching roads, doing that without impacting staffing or the projects that we accomplish. So we're just trying to make it work. So I just want to get this into your hands so you guys could see it, and then as it gets updated, I'll stay in touch.
Any questions, members, about this?
No question. I just want to say thank you for putting this together and the forecasting and looking out for that. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Not a problem.
Thanks.
This is what's kept me up at night.
Right. Yeah,
I don't know what I don't know. I can work with uncertainty, but when you have no clue how far it's going to fall off.
Right. When Jamie and I were talking before the meeting, and Jamie called me on Friday and told me what this was going to look like. He gave me the preview.
He set up his weekend.
Because of that, you folks may know in the Licking County edition of the Dispatch, they have maybe once a month a business insider or something that's devoted to Licking County businesses. It may come in the Advocate, I'm not sure, but it comes about once a month. So I was going through that, and they report what other cities, Newark and Heath, typically are getting in terms of income. Their tax income fell off by 50% from this year to last year. Now they collect on their own, so they're seeing an immediate. So this is a pipeline. The pipeline got turned off for several weeks. That money's not going to come back. So this type of shortfall, we're not going to all of a sudden make that up. We're going to have how big the shortfall is going to be. That's what we don't know. We're going to have a budget shortfall this year. I can't see how you can't. Right. It's the same thing in my business. I'm getting some new business in, but I'm also getting paid on things that I did back in. I just got a check today from Franklin County for something I did back in February. They're just now getting around to paying some of these things, but I'm okay now. But come September, when the pipeline
Works its way through.
Has worked its way through. That's when the problem's going to be, and that's what Jamie and I were talking about that. I think I talked to Tim about that too. Was that if we're bopping along, okay, and then all of a sudden we're going to start to see this where that the shortfall is going to catch up, and we just don't know what it's going to be. So this is something to think about when we're talking about planning for next year, but also paying for this year. So thanks, appreciate it. Thanks. Anything else? Any questions? Anything, Jamie? Anything else? I don't think.
I think that was pretty much everything.
Okay. Anybody have anything else? Any members, anything? Committee? Okay, Ms. Chicken? Okay, motion to adjourn, please.
So moved.
Second.
I'll
Kathy,
second
roll, please.
Barstow?
Yes.
Hampshire?
Yes.
Epperson?
Yes.
Meeting adjourned, and we have 10 minutes till regular council meeting. Thanks, guys. Hold on. What? Oh, hey, Tommy.
What are you drinking? It looks like a bottle of Jack when you carried it in.
Hey, I'm kind of given this week, everything's in here.